Hi everybody, today I'd like to talk to you about recitative. Together we'll look at what a recitative is, where it comes from, and how you can go about learning and effectively performing them. A recitative is a style of singing which adopts rhythms and delivery of normal speech. It was most common in opera and oratorio between the 17th and 19th centuries. Recitative has its origins in ancient Greek theater. It was rediscovered by a group of humanist intellectuals in Florence during the Renaissance called the Florentine Camerata. The Florentine Camerata was interested in reviving the classical Greek dramas, which they presumed were originally sung. They had believed music had become corrupt, and by returning to the forms and style of the ancient Greeks, the art of music could be improved, and thereby society could be improved as well. They experimented with different ways of setting music, and eventually reached the heightened form of storytelling which we know today as Monody. Monody consists of a single melodic line above a chordal accompaniment improvised by Basso continuo. Extended passages of Monody within an opera are called recitativi, which comes from the Italian word recitare, or to recite. If we look at the early 17th century operas of Jacopo Peri, Giulio Caccini, and then later the music of Claudio Monteverdi, we see that the operas consisted mostly of recitativi, with few sections of arias and ensembles interspersed. By the 19th century, recitativo became unfashionable, and composers like Rossini and Donizetti had their students and assistants write the recitatives for them so that they could concentrate their efforts on writing arias and ensembles. By the middle of the 19th century, the Secco Recitativo eventually disappears, but it does, however, make a comeback in the 20th century operas of Stravinsky, the Rake's Progress, and Benjamin Britten, the Rape of Lucretia. There are basically two types of recitativo. There's the recitativo secco and the recitativo accompagnato. Recitativo secco literally means dry recitative and is accompanied by a basso continuo group. Basso continuo basically means that there's a bass line with numbers implying certain harmonies over which a group of musicians improvise a chordal accompaniment. The instruments could vary and consist of any group of cello, violone, bass, harpsichord, organ, fortepiano, harp, guitar, theorbo, lute, archlute, etc. In a secco recitativo, there's very little repetition, and the setting is mostly syllabic, which means that every syllable corresponds to its own note. The delivery is rhythmically free and closer to the patterns of regular speech than a sung aria. The other type of recitativo is the accompagnato, which means basically that it's a recitative accompanied by the orchestra. It tends to be much more dramatic than a regular recitativo secco. In an accompagnato, the orchestra reflects the feelings of the character on stage. For example, when we hear dotted rhythms, that implies a certain severity or gravity, austerity, majesty, an extroverted feeling. When we hear running scale or tirades, that shows fury, anger, the spirits breaking out of hell. If we hear dissonant harmonies, that shows shock. Softer dynamics represent loneliness, sadness, more introverted feelings. One of the biggest difficulties that a recitative presents to a singer is that the notation does not reflect exactly what is to be heard or performed. On the page, a recitative appears to be rhythmically monotonous, or always the same. Blah, 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 every note on an eighth note, or maybe a chord. Not very interesting, and it's very mechanical. However, when it comes to performing it, the opposite is expected. But why does a composer notate the recitative so strictly if he expects it to be performed freely? Well, composers treated the bar lines as a type of placeholder to organize the occurrence of strong and weak beats. very often strong syllables or accented syllables will fall on beats 1 or 3. Within the measure, there's also an understood hierarchy of weight or emphasis. Beat 1 is the strongest, beat 2 is light, beat 3 is medium strong, beat 4 is the lightest, and then the downbeat again. Another difficulty with the notation of recitative is that essential notes like appoggiature are missing. Appoggiature should be added at the ends of phrases and to important words whose last 2 syllables are placed on the same note. We can substitute this repeated note with a step or a leap of a fourth. But why don't composers just write in these appoggiature? Well, appoggiature, as we saw in the last video, tend to be dissonant notes. And according to the rules of counterpoint, you are not allowed to write dissonances on downbeats. Now, if we don't have any dissonances, then it tends to get a little bit boring. So singers were trained in Handel's time and earlier to extempore or to improvise on their own, putting in these appoggiature, these dissonant notes to give expression, bring out the cadence of the language, but still keep the composer looking good on the page. There's also no dynamic information written in a recitative. Does that mean the composer wants everything the same volume? No, by no means. The composer knew that most performers of the day could speak Italian and understood the dramatic inflections when music would rise, when the character would feel quieter, or what the singer would need to emphasize in order to create a dramatic performance. So he left the singer free to use their judgment and instincts to bring the musical drama to life. Well, for non-native speakers, that can be very difficult because you have to understand the fine nuances of the poetry that you're reciting. Within poetry, we have what we call poetic or metric feet, which is the way that strong and weak syllables are emphasized. Let's take a look at the 3 accenti in Italian. The first is the so-called accento piano, which means the soft accent, or sometimes also called the feminine accent. And that happens where there's an emphasis or stress on the second last syllable. Words like bella, grande, recitare, parlare. Then we have the accento tronco, or the shortened accent, which is also known as the masculine accent because it's quite strong sounding. Those consist of any accents with a vowel with an accent on it. For example, farò, sarà, così, è. Any word that has an accent at the end. Very often, we'll have in poetry a truncation or shortening of a longer word because it sounds more beautiful. For example, the word amor. Well, the word is amore, but we cut the last E off and have the word amor. Vendicar, vendicare, vendicar. The third accent is sdrucciolo. Sdrucciolo means sliding or gliding, and it happens where the accent or emphasis is on the third last syllable. Words like essere, perdere, Raphael, benissimo. Before we look at a recitative together, I'd like to give you a list of tips and guidelines to help you as you learn your recitatives. Number 1, translate every single word. Never sing a word whose meaning you don't know, and translate it into your mother language so that it becomes your own. Speak through the recitative without singing so that you get to understand the taste of every single sound. Remember that you must also communicate the punctuation. A comma, a period, an exclamation point, a question mark. They all change the way that you should present your text, right? Right. Once you understand the meaning and the sounds of all the words you're using, you can begin to learn the notes. Start by playing the chord underneath you so you can find where the chord tones are. Then see what notes pass and move. What are neighbor tones? Where are they so that you can break your musical line into larger chunks, not just syllables and individual musical events. Look for appoggiature and write them down. Appoggiature can happen by step or by leap, by whole step, by half step. The smaller the interval, the sadder the feeling. The larger the interval, the more happy or extroverted. You can decide which fits best according to your musical taste. Just use your ear and see which one makes the melody sound more natural. That's the ultimate goal, to make the recitative sound natural. Avoid monotony. Monotony is when every sound sounds the same. Monotony is the mother of boredom. Even if every sound is beautiful, it becomes tiring on the ear. We need contrast in recitative. A well-performed recitative can make a 3-hour opera fly by like that, whereas a poorly recitative can make a 1-hour cantata seem like it lasts forever. Exaggerate the diction. Every sound must be heard from the stage, and every sound has an expressive quality to it. Yeah, it takes a lot of energy, but nobody said that opera was supposed to be easy. Timing is essential. Never wait for an entrance in a recitative. It should always flow one line into the next, because when there's dead space between entrances, we lose our momentum. And once we lose the momentum of a scene, it's very difficult to gain it back. At the beginning of a recitative, you don't have to wait for the harpsichordist to finish rolling their chord. Whenever you have your note in your ear, you can just start, so that there's a fading out of the harpsichord and a fading in of the voice. A harpsichordist will typically put your first note somewhere in the top of the chord so that you can hear it, so that I never have to wait for the harpsichord to finish his first note. Recitatives, from a dramatic point of view, can be the most interesting, engaging part of an opera, so learn your character's story and tell it effectively. Now we'll take the first recitative from Handel's Il trionfo del tempo e del disinganno and look at it together to see how we can bring it to life. In this first recitative, we have two characters, piacere and bellezza, two allegorical figures representing pleasure and beauty, introducing themselves to the audience. Let's hear what's on the page. Very mechanical, very robotic. We just did what's on the page in time. Not how a recitative works. First, we have to take a look at the language. Io che sono il piacere, giuro che sempre sarai bella. Good. Let's take a look at the punctuation and see where there's commas and periods. Io, comma, che sono il piacere, comma, giuro che sempre sarai bella. Punct. Period, full stop. At the ends of these phrases, where the comma and period fall, we have words that have two syllables on the same note, piacere and bella. Those are great places to put an appoggiatura. Io che sono il piacere. Pretty nice. Io che sono il piacere. Ma. That's the nicest. Giuro che sempre sarai bella. Dissonant note, but very beautiful, very bella. Sempre sarai bella. Ed io che sono la bellezza, che sono la bellezza. There's that passing appoggiatura. Giuro di non lasciarti. Ed io che sono la bellezza, giuro di non lasciarti. E si manco di fede, importuno dolor, e sia mia mercede. And the final cadence usually happens after the voice is finished to give a sense of closure. So there it is. We took 8 measures of music, and transformed it from just placeholders and abstract signs to telling a story and becoming something very expressive, something very beautiful. I hope this was helpful for you. As always, I'm here. I don't have any place to go. So if you need help, call me, write me. We can talk through the recitatives together and look for the appropriate places to add appoggiature and other ornamentation. In the meantime, happy practicing, stay healthy, and till the next time.
Che sempre sarai bella e Dio, che sono una bellezza, giuro di non lasciarti, e se manco di fede importuno d'oro sia mia mercé.